with all these tweaks, this bike is absolutely brilliant at some things, but absolutely awful at others. Hey up, I'm Guy Kesterman, the Tester Man, and behind me is the specialised Chisel Evo comp, but in an experimental extra rad build. So what have I done to it? Has it made it better? Or have I actually ruined it? And why are the lessons we can learn from what I've done to this bike also super valuable for a lot of riders looking to upgrade an older trail bike? Well, let's hit the trails and find out. So, what exactly have I done with this build? Well, the first thing, and most obvious from point of view of the camera, is I've got rid of that 760mm flat bar and 60mm stem and swapped it for an 800mm 50mm rise bar with a 35mm stem. So much higher, much wider, much shorter stem. Then, which I think I alluded to in the comments already, I've taken it from tin 29er to a mullet setup at the back. So that's 27.5-inch rear wheel with a 29er front wheel. And for good measure, seeing as they were sat there with appropriate tyres on, I've also put specialised Traverse carbon wheels on there. And the tyres are kind of similar, but not quite. I've actually got rid of the T9 on the front. Was a purgatory T9. Now it's an Eliminator T7, so faster rolling compound and a slightly faster rolling, but still very blocky tread pattern as well. And then on the back, got my favourite dyno saw donut, the discontinued semi-slick Schwalbe rock razor in 27.5 by 2.6. So very robust, very fast, but a proper semi-slick. So you're living on the edges or you're not getting any grip at all. And while I'm obviously reviewing these changes on this bang up to date Chisel Evo, well, bang up to date in XC terms, its angles are actually very similar to a lot of older trail bikes. So sort of 66.5 degree head angle as standard, 460-ish reach, relatively tall 335mm bottom bracket. Those are all things that you'll find on mid to longer travel trail bikes from like 10-15 years ago, as are, you know, narrower bar, longer stem. So while I'm obviously playing on the Chisel here, I think digging into these changes and whether you should make them and what the effects are could be relevant for a lot of riders on older bikes as well. So, whichever camp you fall into, or whether you just fancy seeing me razzing around in some of my favourite woods, stay tuned and I'll talk you through what's worked and what hasn't, and how, maybe even why, who knows. One thing that's, well, many things that are very obvious before we even get into the meat of the climb. That smaller mullet rear wheel and whatever it's done to the suspension kinematic just aren't rolling over stuff as smoothly as a 29er. So there's a lot more stalling and having to dig it out with a pedal stroke than before. And then that super short stem and slacky seat angle means, well, there's a lot of leverage through that big bar. The front end is naturally twitching around a lot more. So you can hold it, but it's more like having a spaniel tied to your handlebars than the relatively docile, straight line Labrador it was before. And as I've knocked about 25mm off the stem, and slackening the angles reduces reach as well, as does a high-rise bar. There's a lot less breathing room, even at the saddle. It's feeling quite cramped. So the people who were delighted to hear me breathing on the last video, gonna be really pleased how quickly I'm breathing on this one. Cheers guys, love you. Little pro tip, if you have got a short stem slack bike that wanders all over the place on climbs, or any bike you just want to keep straighter, rather than hooking your thumbs around the grips as normal, just flick them to the top. Just naturally drops your elbows and stops you yanking on the steering as much. So just stays a little bit more relaxed and more natural. So why would you want a mullet if it, tyre for tyre, makes things slower and lumpier to ride? And why is it so popular among pretty much all the World Cup downhill racers and enduro riders right now? Well, the reason is it changes the way the bike turns. It gives you a much tighter radius on the rear wheel, gives that changed diameter and different contact patch. So basically the back wheel scrubs inside the rear wheel. Hey! So you've got stability up front from that 29er, and then the back wheel kind of can dance around of its own accord, or if you're adept enough to shove it around with your hips, it's a much more agile, responsive, flickable, fun ride, you know, which works on tighter trails like this, or if you're just arsing around, getting airborne, pulling tricks. And that's definitely what it felt like down there. Sorry, I was talking about the mullet rear wheel making things firmer with the wheel size and the kinematic. Like, I assumed you knew exactly what the science was behind that, but if you're coming at this from an old bike, maybe you don't. So basically, it's a smaller diameter wheel. So proportionately, everything it hits is bigger and can knock more energy out of it. And it's a steeper angle of attack between the tyre and that object, so it doesn't smooth it down. And then shock leverage can also change because of the angles involved in tipping the bike backwards. But obviously, putting in a smaller rear wheel doesn't just have a big effect on turning circles. It also makes a massive difference to the geo as well. For a start, it drops that rear axle a lot lower, which means you're looking at a much lower BB height. So this bike goes from 335 down to 318. And then bringing it back also affects the reach. So shortens that slightly. And then, of course, slackens the head angle as well. So it goes from 66 back to 65 as I've measured it in the workshop. And that all plays into that slacker, lower kind of mantra that all the, you know, the rad lads and the downhill dolls tell you. In fact, all the media have been telling you is the holy grail for about 15 years. So it makes it more stable, more anchored through the turns because your centre of gravity is a lot lower. So you really can lay the pressure through the tyres, you know, really stamp it through the berms in those situations. However, on this bike, because it wasn't long to start with, and I fitted a super short stem, you've now got a really, really short kind of BMX length bike. So it's quite a weird mix, and definitely not making it a contemporary bike, unless you're talking about sort of dirt jump or even slalom frames. And another happy upshot of switching the kit on this is I've saved a bunch of weight, getting up to 900 grams. So while I'm definitely having to tuck my tailbone in to get a decent riding position, it's a lot lighter to get up the hills. What's interesting is where that weight's been saved. It's about 300 in the front wheel, over 400 in the rear, but nearly half of that is in the cassette, switching from SX grade to an XO grade I had lying about, which, considering a wheel change, would cost you about 1,500 quid, and a cassette, even though it's expensive, about 300. That's far better value for money in terms of weight lost per pound. But obviously you will run into the Hyperglide free up issue on this bike, so have a look at an aftermarket solution like, what are they called? Garbaruk, thanks Neil. Neil hasn't been chatting, so he's got some oxygen left in his brain. And, well, gone to a carbon bar and short stem. That OG Specialized stem was still pretty light, because it's a narrow flat bar, even though it's alloy, that wasn't heavy, so only saving about 30 grams in the stem and about 70 grams in the bar. So always weigh things before you replace them and see how much they actually weigh before making assumptions of where you're going to chase that weight out. This really is like going back to climbing positions in 2010, but without the legs and the lungs I had 15 years ago. I'm going back to ride position. So while a modern bike with a load of reach, I mean, that's why modern bikes grew the reach, because we all put shorter stems on and wider bars, which bring your hands further back if they've got some sweep on them. That's why reach got longer, to maintain that length. And then it got really extreme and it's kind of worked its way back from there. But we're still riding much more stable, straight line prone bikes than we were before, because we're riding faster, wilder trails generally. So we're really kind of tweaky, nadgery. I mean, this trail is even called Nadge, appropriately enough. This is kind of great, because at slow speed it's a lot easier to maneuver and twitch and tweak around, because you can get over either end of the bike more easily. But as the speed builds up and the impacts get bigger, you're far more likely to get kicks out the front on a bike that's shorter and twitchier in the steering. So again, it's not a no-brainer to automatically go with a short stem and wider bar if your bike's already short and relatively steep. Right, if I had to pick a climbing challenge for a really low slung short bike to almost certainly get stopped very early, this would be it. Yep, time for a bit of reverse nudge. I think we're going to hear those poor time pedals getting smacked out very early. Oh, yep. Whoa. Oh well, still going so far. Oh dear. Oh, well, maybe that's an advantage of a super short reach. You can at least flick it around a tree like a cyclocrosser. And let's pretend a tree grab doesn't count, shall we? Oh, all that lumpy compression tuning and that smaller rear wheel aren't helping here either. And as you see, there's a lot of steering going on. But at least I do have a lot of leverage. And now this bike's only just over 13 kilos. There's less calories going into getting it upwards, at least. Even if it's not going straight much. And the rollover and grip are reduced. Oh. Come on guys, concentrate. Yeah, again, climbing, you have to use a lot of body English. There's no just sitting here. Come on. Thought my pedals were going to tap out there for sure. Not saying anything. Because even if I do make it up, it's definitely not because of the bike. It's despite it. Or maybe we've been wrong about GL all this time. 445mm is the answer. Boom. So what's the verdict then? Is rad always the right answer? And without wanting to dodge the bullet, but try and be responsible, I think it depends entirely what you want out of your bike. Because I think this has proved that the original bike, in many ways, was actually super balanced in terms of steering, angles, ride position, with the frame it was mounted on. So you can see I'm already clipping those wider bars there, while that tighter rear wheel is meant to get me in quicker, and it is, you know, I'm leaning more. I'm still overshooting as well with that slightly longer front centre. And it's definitely compromised in terms of pedal clearance and breathing space, particularly on the climbs. It's a bike that requires a lot more management and manhandling now. But once you get into it, like I have now, the ability to hop and pop and have a properly instant reaction with almost BMX ride position is absolutely awesome. But that's not going to be everybody's cup of tea. And on this particular bike, and it's probably the same in a lot of older bikes as well, because the seat tube is high even on this large 450mm, there's not, whoa, there's not the chance to size it up to find that length in an extra large, or you won't have any room for a dropper post. So again, short stem is really going to eat into that breathing space, but the fact it means you can really pop the front wheel up super easily like that, and as long as you remember to get your weight forward rather than letting that smaller wheel and taller fulcrum, taller bar lean you back, then you can properly drive this front end. But it is a lot more dynamic riding even than the standard Chisel, which is naturally an agile bike, but compared to a big long slack low modern enduro bike, which is basically designed to go straight and live on courses where even the corners are pulled up at the edges, so you just have to lean rather than steer, it's going to feel a right handful. And finally, you know, just that point with the weight, always check before you assume what differences changes are going to make. Brand managers speccing these bikes generally put, or hopefully, not always, I'll admit it, hopefully put a lot of time and thought into how the package hangs together in terms of performance, rather than just picking the cheapest options. And also, don't forget that modern bikes have changed because riding has changed a lot. It's much faster, bigger jumps, bike park stuff, like I say, with berms and tabletops and all that palaver. If you're still riding like you did back in 2007, like a lot of people in the comments for this live ride video have been, then your bike is shaped for riding at that time. So don't assume it's out of date if your riding hasn't changed. So there you go. Chisel Evo comp, Guycase TV chav build. It's certainly been an interesting video to make. I don't know if it's been worth much. I mean, let me know in the comments if you've got some useful information out of it. But I think it's definitely proved that you can't just follow fashion and do all these kind of must-do upgrade moves without thinking of the overall effect. Because some of the numbers, some of the characteristics that I've introduced here, definitely a positive in some situations, but others are a real downside. And like I say, if you'd have come to me with the geo sheet of this bike as it is now, I'd been like, absolutely not. That's short and way too tall for a medium, let alone a large. But on the other hand, have you seen, I've still had an absolute blast riding it. And I think that's kind of the biggest lesson of all, is don't get too hung up over numbers. Just get out there and ride whatever bike you've got. I always remember Brandt being stopped. I think it was like the original Malverns back in the 90s, and when he was the editor of MBR that I was working for at the time, the magazine, and he said, someone said, "What's the best bike in the world?" And he was like, "It's the bike you've got. It's the bike you've got in your shed, because that's the one you can ride right now. It doesn't matter what we're raving about in the magazines or the, you know, the priciest bike in the local bike shop. The best bike in the world is the one you can ride right now. So whatever you've got, whatever the angles, whatever the wheel size, just get out there. Get out in the woods. Get a mate like Neil and just, you know, have a laugh. That's what matters. That's what matters, getting out here and just having fun. Not losing your head over geometry or components or tech. It's not about head angles, it's about head space. So, with that cheesy line hanging in the air, I've been Guy Kesterman on Guycase TV. Give it a subscribe if you haven't already, because we're almost at 40,000 subscribers now, so it'd be great to get over that mark. Like, thumbs up, always helps. Shout to your mates, tell them to come and watch the channel, is the most valuable thing of all. And let me know what you think and whether it's been handy in the comments, because I love a chat with you guys. It keeps me occupied when I'm not riding my bike. But for now, I've been in the woods on a very, very wonky chav experimental build. But I guess the bottom line is, am I going to keep it this way, or am I going to revert back to type? I think, to be honest, as much as this has been an absolute laugh, this bike worked best as it came from Specialized. So, fair play, guys. I see what you did, why you did, but it's always worth giving things a tweak, eh?